Well, the video I made recently on the Moscow mood has received a good bit of engagement and a great reaction. Brief note for those of you who are new to the channel. Well, I talk about whatever I want to, and so therefore often talk about what's going on in my church or in my town. This channel is whatever I want it to be, and so usually it's focused on poetry and language. So, caveat emptor, as the saying goes. Hope you guys like my poncho. One of my sons bought it for me in the plains of Peru. I wanted to keep the last video on the subject of this so-called Moscow mood brief. So I focused on one binary, one dichotomy, and mentioned another. Successfully kept it short. Gratitude was expressed. Y'all are welcome. Who knows how long this one will be. So a theologian I really enjoy following. He's a fantastic Twitter follow. Alistair Roberts dropped into the comments for that last video and left a very long comment. Long enough that, you know, it sort of began to feel like maybe he wasn't commenting to me, sort of posting something. It sort of passed beyond comment into post. And that's okay, because, you know, I understand that we get excited. And that comment provides me with an opportunity to talk about something that bothers me. Now, this video is definitely inspired by Alistair's comment. So I'm not going to claim that it's not oppositional. I'm not going to be disingenuous. My general policy when being mentioned online is to ignore. And so Alistair's comment, again, he's a theologian I thoroughly enjoy. Right, I recently was checking out his video on the label of postmillennialism. Great stuff. This video is inspired by. It is not some sort of thrown gauntlet. So he can do with it what he will. So one of the things that De Young's article on the Moscow mood did was conflate a whole bunch of disparate but yet connected things with Moscow. And most of what connects these things is their geographic proximity. But not all things labeled Moscow are Moscow, which is why today we have naming of parts. One of the things that happens around all the energy, all the ecclesiastical and cultural energy here in Moscow, is that both internally and externally, so many things get lumped together that ought not to be. Internally, it usually comes from the baby boomers. Externally, it generally comes from people who are not really familiar with everything that's going on here, not really attuned to the voices that come out of here. Alistair is familiar, deeply familiar. So before I engage directly with his comment, y'all, it's not a Moscow mood. Let us have the naming of parts. We have a Douglas Wilson mood. We have a Canon Press mood. We have a Christ Church mood. And those are all things within the same funnel. There are other funnels. De Young talked about, he didn't call it the Moscow universe, what did he call it? Ecosystem. The things that De Young and Roberts object to, they're very different ways, but the thing they object to is the tone, the vibes, that canon puts out there. Alistair talked about the whole, he compared the perhaps over-intellectualized voice of other reform circles of the PCA as like an NPR, and the Moscow voice as being a Joe Rogan. Well, first of all, I would say, and that's very apt, but I would say it's apt because NPR is propaganda and the world building of propaganda, the use of narrative in a lying, dishonest way. Joe Rogan is an explorer. Now, I have no interest in professional wrestling or space aliens or ancient aliens for that matter. So I don't listen to Joe Rogan either. Also, by the way, I don't really follow what goes on with No Quarter November. It's not to my taste. But I also recognize that No Quarter November is the action of a publishing house, of which Pastor Wilson is I believe he's a board member. The naming of parts is very important. It casts it in a different light, does it not? So we have the empty words of the intelligentsia and the wannabes thereof in the PCA. And then the empty words of bar stool boasters and brawlers. Okay? Well, that's a market right there. That's a market. Let me read you a couple of quotes from Alistair's comment. Moscow is a wonderful place, but it seems that a smaller group of Muscovites are the ones holding the loudspeaker. And so we get belligerent and often dumb culture war spectacle, silly stunts, and an excessive juvenile shock jock commentary rather than presentations of the actual thick communities that exist there. Well, first of all, I truly appreciate even the use of the word communities, because even if we limit it to the active Christian communities, not only churches, but communities in town, he's right. He is very familiar with Moscow. And so there are indeed communities. But here's the question. Whose obligation is it to give a voice to these thick communities? Is it this for-profit publishing house? Why should they give me a voice? Why should they give my friend Austin a voice? Why should they give my friend Rusty a voice? They're under no obligation. Now, as it happens, they have recently given me a platform for my voice, both in publishing some poetry of mine, and I'm reading a bunch of audiobooks for them. So, actually, like a literal platform for my voice, which I appreciate, and I particularly appreciate because I think it brings a little diversity, right? A little No Quarter November and a little poetry, all from the same house. I dig that. I like Canon's mission. But let's have a clear understanding of where the voices are coming from, who's platforming the voices, and particularly who is obligated to do that. There are plenty of people doing stuff around here and making their own platforms, their own loudspeakers. A smaller group of Muscovites are the ones holding the loudspeaker. The loudspeaker? The loudspeaker. I have a loudspeaker of my own. I'm talking into it right now. There are a bunch of loudspeakers around. In the world of education, I could give you a half dozen significant voices in the world of education who came up through much of what some in Moscow created, and then had their philosophical divergences and differences and built their own things with high repute and national repercussion. Publishing houses and consultancies and schools, all just growing up out of this, and they have their own voices. Often, they choose to make nothing at all of their historic connections because they're not interested in people making this mistake of thinking there's only one loudspeaker. We have our own loudspeakers, y'all. So no one's holding the loudspeaker. Canon and Pastor Wilson are holding a loudspeaker. Moscow's online branding, which is different from its reality on the ground, is about a different kind of hot air, about lots of belligerent yet unserious, vibe-driven material. Again, Canon's online branding, Pastor Wilson's online branding. I do sometimes wish that some of the voices around here would be heard more, but that's up to us, not up to them. Think about New St. Andrews College, a very distinct voice of their own and a wonderful institution. It's actually why we're in Moscow right now, because I think it's the best college in the United States. Founded, actually, by Douglas Wilson. I think if you spend any time here, you will note right away that there's a very distinct flavor, and it very much has its own life. They use a company kind of connected with Canon for their marketing. And so, you often get a little bit of that flavor in their marketing. Well, I understand that it can be difficult from far away not to start just talking Moscow. But Alistair claims, and I shouldn't say claims, he is deeply familiar with Moscow. And so I would hope that from someone like that, the distinctions would be drawn. I don't want to be thought of as a mouthpiece. I don't want to be thought of as a puppet. I want to be thought of as having my own voice. Alistair spoke of seriousness and said that a lot of the stuff coming out of Moscow is unserious. I would say there's actually a lot of seriousness all around. Seriousness among those who take Pastor Wilson and Canon to task. And I think sometimes too much seriousness from Canon as well. There are a lot of different ways to laugh. Now, I do think there's a paucity of laughter among those opposing Canon and Pastor Wilson. I've been in a few fracas in my day, both on and off the rugby pitch. And every time there has been laughter. That is often the kind of laughter that one gets from Canon. The laughter of adrenaline and testosterone. Right? When you have someone by the collar and they have you by the collar, and there's a sort of adrenaline-powered joy that comes up. I think the thing that is lacking on both sides is levity. is taking things so seriously all the time. But that, of course, is not the point of the video. The point of the video is to make distinctions, is to name the parts. Especially if you know that there are many communities, Christian communities here, doing the things that communities do. Then you could do them the courtesy of giving each of them their voices. Peace of Christ be upon you.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pension.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!